joining this call today.
Yeah, of course.
I'm Liel. I'm Marketing Director of Friendly Technologies, and today we are going to have a device management talk with Jason Walls from QA Cafe. Jason is a Director of Technical Marketing at QA Cafe, and he's also a leader of a few tech groups at Broadband Forum, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you. So yeah, I am the Director of Technical Marketing at QA Cafe, and we work with the Broadband Forum, and so my position at the Broadband Forum is the Director of the Broadband User Services Work Area and the Connected Home Council.
Can you please share some information about QA Cafe and your focus, your target customers, and your main technological focus, and what you've been busy with lately?
Yeah, so QA Cafe, we are very deeply involved in networking technologies, and we try to produce quality test and analysis solutions for people who are either building networking products or analyzing networks in real time. And we have a couple of products that have come out of that. Our flagship product is called CD Router, and it's kind of become the industry standard for testing Wi-Fi routers, home gateways, Wi-Fi access points, anything in the home that's passing packets. Basically, you can test with CD Router. And through that process, we're so involved with standards because the things that we're testing are most often standardized protocols or performance metrics, that kind of a thing that are being implemented on devices. And so what we do with CD Router is we integrate into people's development process so that they can perform repeatable automated testing of their products and kind of get them out the door faster and get them to market faster. And through that process, we've actually kind of become the industry standard when it comes to home networking, small business networking products, Wi-Fi gateways, that kind of a thing. We've kind of carved a niche for ourselves there.
Thank you so much for that. What significant challenges do you face at QA Cafe, and what ways do you find, or creative ways do you find to overcome them?
It really is keeping up with technology, right? So our customers are either trying to implement the latest and greatest, or you'll come across situations where there's some older technology that's been in some open source code somewhere that people haven't tested for a while, or they don't know that there's something wrong with it. So keeping on top of that and how the entire industry is playing out in terms of implementing those technologies is a challenge for us. We stay on top of it by being thought leaders in that area ourselves, and also making sure that we're participating in standards bodies and open source projects and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so you have to keep up with a range of technologies, also backwards, and also be on top of what's happening and what's developing right now. Any significant achievement that you're really, really proud of in your department at QA Cafe in the recent years?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. We'll talk about the user services platform a bit. I think kind of helping to drive that was definitely a big accomplishment. But we'll talk about more about that. But the other thing that I would say is our work in implementing different security technologies that people would not have thought of putting together to do certain things, right? So for our CloudShark product, which is basically an easier way for teams to collaborate on network packet captures and store them in a central location and make them searchable and really kind of bring modern technology to packet analysis. What we did is we took, there are so many tools out there for, that analysts use. Most of them are like command line things, stuff that's just part of Linux or an open source project. We've taken a lot of those tools and put them in CloudShark so that people can just use them without having to know all that underlying stuff, and make it kind of more elegant and web-based and, easier to work with. And through that process, we've actually taken some of those things and then put them back in CD Router too. So one of the cool things that we did this year was release our security add-on, which, in addition to having a bunch of security related tests for Wi-Fi gateways, we actually actively monitor the live traffic of a device while it's being tested. And so you'll come across situations where, you had no idea, or let's say that obviously we test a lot of things in our own lab, right? In addition to people buying CD Router to test their products, we also do it to test CD Router and make sure that everything's working right. We've come across retail gateways that just when they're connecting to cloud services, and they're connecting to them completely unsecured and just sending all kinds of information to things, right? So we added that to CD Router so people could monitor the behavior of their own devices, right? And it actually kind of doubles, not just for security, because now you can, as a service provider, you can test to make sure that a device is implementing some sort of policy choices, right? So let's take TR-369. Let's say, it talks to a particular ACS, and now you've implemented new firmware that tells it to talk to a different ACS. You can use the security add-on. It's monitoring the live traffic, so you can see that it's actually, trying to connect to the right things and using it securely and stuff like that.
Yeah, actually, now that you mentioned this, security is like always such a hot topic when it comes to device management. I mean, it's probably always a hot topic, but in device management, it's a very hot topic. And then actually, I remember a funny story that happened a couple of years ago when Checkpoint, they tested a bunch of ACS vendors, and then they presented it on, what was it? It was like a hacker conference somewhere in the US. DEFCON? What was it?
I don't remember if it was DEF CON or not. The problem is that they were trying to make the story that TR-69 itself was insecure, which isn't true.
It's about implementation, right? Yeah.
But on the flip side of that is there was a little bit of a misunderstanding about how service providers deploy things too, because they were like, oh, well, these servers aren't secured. It's like, well, providers are trusting that they're in a walled garden. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe that's a bad idea, but that's the decision that they made, and that's why they did it that way. It's not some inherent mistake,
Right. Yeah. Actually, which brings us again to USP, which also added a lot of features in that department. Yeah, we'll talk about it a bit later. Yeah, you brought up security, and I remember that story of Checkpoint. Cool. So, and another question I want to ask you in regards to QA Cafe is, how do you envision the role of QA Cafe in this evolving world where everything is changing literally every second? Technologies are emerging, they're taking over, other technologies becoming obsolete, and then you just mentioned that one of your challenges is keeping up with everything, keeping up with technology, and how do you see QA evolve into this kind of new world that we're all going to experience in a second from now?
It's nice that we are able to keep on top of stuff like that and remain sort of very agile. And so one of the things that we're working on right now is trying to take the expertise that we have in these standards and protocol testing and performance and security and all these things, and bring it to the IoT world. And it's very interesting. And this is part of the justification for the user services platform too. The consumer electronics world, now in the world of IoT, you have the consumer electronics world that has never had to deal with having a network interface on their product, right? Mm-hmm. So they're getting this stuff from all sorts of other sources, right? Because, they shouldn't have to have, the people who have absolute perfect knowledge of these things when implementing their stuff, right? They're trying to build products and get products out the door. And so that's why you see all this, all these stories about IoT things being insecure is it's not their area of expertise, right? Mm-hmm. So now everyone who was making a consumer electronics product, basically a piece of plastic with a 3-year warranty that, mm-hmm. if you say see you later once it's out the door, is now a network device. Mm-hmm. And it has to care about network security. It has to care about software life cycles, right? Hardware life cycles that they didn't have to do before, right? The concept of upgrading it, on a regular basis are things that they now have to deal with. So at QA Cafe, what we're trying to do is kind of take that expertise that we have from CD Router, the test platform, and bring it to the IoT world. And that's kind of what we're working on next, is making it so that there will be a completely automated and integrated into your CI test tool for IoT stuff.
That's really cool. Actually, I was talking to one of our distributors in Europe, and we're discussing smart home. And this person I spoke to, she mentioned to me that all the service providers are really keen on offering smart home services in Europe. But people in Europe are so scared for their privacy and for the security of the devices and how they're going to be secured, how they're going to be guarded, that people are really holding back on actually acquiring that kind of service from service providers. I think if the focus is on security and actually securing the devices, making them feel secure to the end consumers, then perhaps that will not be a challenge even for European market.
No, for sure. And it's going to be a tough story to tell to consumers because there's technological advances that are making it possible. And sometimes it's very difficult to explain those technological advances, right?
Yeah.
It's there will be things that are added to devices, like USP that solve these problems, but trying to say, oh no, now we have this thing that allays your fears is a tough sell, so it might take a while.
Yeah. It's also very, very hard to adhere to the basic fears of people. Something that is very, very on instinctive level.
Oh, I mean, some of it's legitimate, right? My favorite meme going around is the one where it's like, in the past, United States consumers were like, we need to be careful. The government might be wiretapping our lines. And now it's like, hey, wiretap, give me a recipe for.
So funny. It's so true. Yeah, it's so true. Actually, did you watch what's it called? What's the new Netflix documentary on social dilemma? Did you watch it?
No, I haven't watched it yet, but enough people.
Everybody's raving about it right now. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
It won't ever be solved just by technology. Part of it is new processes around the people who are developing these things, and it's exactly what it is. It's that there are people who are not used to having a regular upgrade path and fixing security patches and that kind of thing. People who've never had to do that in their products before are now going to have to do that, because that's really where the majority of security problems come from. It's not from some inherent underlying technology that either works or doesn't work. It's because something got missed, and you got to be able to fix it as on faster than spinning up an entire new firmware. You're going to be able to fix it.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you have been with Broadband Forum for over a decade in a few capacities. Would you like to share, to elaborate on your experience with Broadband Forum and your experience with leading the bus and CHC work tests, and just tell a bit more about it?
Sure. So I've been doing Broadband Forum for 15 years. I was a grad student when I started. And
UNH? UNH? I'm just guessing.
At UNH, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So when I went, I happened to walk into the group that was talking about TR-69 at the time. This was 2005. So TR-69, the standard, had only been around for a year, which is interesting to put it in the context of USP, because in terms of how fast things are taking off, we're almost like right on the exact same track, right, from years ago. So I got involved with TR-69 and kind of pushed everybody to start doing interoperability events, which really got the standards. There were some things in CWMP 1.0 that made it so that the protocol just was unviable, and we found that stuff out like very early on with interop, right?
Oh, wow.
So that's why don't ever implement 1.0. No. That kind of launched me getting involved with it, and I've always loved that. I've always loved that process of coming up with networking protocols and understanding, who has to talk about what and how much you need to say and how things should progress. And that ended up, obviously, so I was involved in the Broadband Forum from there, started working on data model things and just being involved on a regular basis. And then I took over for a couple of the people who were the former work area directors. And then I was work area director of Broadband User Services from then on out. And then, a couple of years ago, we started the Connected Home Council because we wanted, people who had their marketing caps on to start thinking about how to advertise these solutions and promote them.
Yeah, actually, this is how we know each other, from Connected Home Council. And I've been following, I should have mentioned that in the beginning, but I have been following you for a couple of years now. And what I always loved about all the videos that you make and materials that you post is that it's very, very accessible for people who are not originally from technological background. Just a pleasure to always, come across your materials and whatever you write or post or produce as a video.
Well, thank you. And that's kind of what I try to differentiate for people, because my title is Director of Technical Marketing. And I feel like that's kind of a special thing, because it's not just pushing buttons on doing press releases and that sort of thing. It's like, no, we need to explain some complex topics to a general populace,
Yeah, in terms of benefits and what's in it for them, definitely. Because technical people always fall into their comfort zone, I find, where they talk features and they get very excited, and it's cool. You know, the features sound really cool. Like, wow,
oh yeah,
really
I still
but
do
like,
that.
what? I mean, yeah. But what does it mean for the end users, and what does it mean for what challenges it solves? Yeah. So definitely, technical marketing is the way to go. I think. Yeah, definitely in our niche. Okay, so let's talk about TR-69, how it evolved from 2005 until now, and the milestones that you kind of noticed from 2005 till now.
It was born out of service provider need, and they came. So you already had technologies that, automatically communicated certain information back and forth about devices, right? So you had UPnP at the time, and what service providers were doing to do the initial gateway setup and not send a person to somebody's house in order to set it up, right? Yeah. And what they did is they would like send a CD, like a CD-ROM, right? that you would run to like do the setup, and that would use stuff like TR-64 way back then, or UPnP, right, to do the setup, and that just wasn't viable for the long term. And so they started thinking about TR-69, and a lot of the people who had been involved in UPnP DM got involved in building TR-69, which is why a lot of the original stuff was very similar to it, right? So the original data model, data model is the way in which you describe a device and its capabilities, right? So the original data model was very similar to the way that UPnP DM described a gateway, right? An internet gateway device. In fact, it was called an internet gateway device for a number of reasons, right? And so that went on for a while, and obviously that got locked into a lot of service provider deployments, even to this day. The original data model is still out there. I think the next milestone was definitely doing interoperability testing, right? Because that really opened the door to people to understand how these things are really supposed to work, right? And assumptions that were made that you never would have considered before, and it's kind of a magical process if you ever watch an interoperable, because people are really excited, and their competitors working together, and it's neat. So starting that series really kind of kicked things off, and then when the DOCSIS world became interested was when we started modeling Wi-Fi a little bit better. We built some service data models for other types of devices, right? So set-top boxes got modeled, and then when that world started using it, and they use TR-69 for some very specific things right now. Yeah. It's part of the overall DOCSIS specification. That's obviously that took the next leap for us to redo the data model and come up with the device 2 data model, which was a lot more logical, laid out a lot better. One can argue whether it needs to have a little bit more explanation of how to properly implement it, because there's a lot in there. But it made it easier for us to add new things, which was that was really what changed, right? Is now the way it's laid out, it's very easy to add a new technology to the data model that can now be modeled and controlled by TR-369 USP. And then we launched a certification program for TR-369. It was a little late, but going through the certification is by far the easiest way to just do the baseline and be like, yes, we do.
Yeah, and we'll talk about USP and in the context of USP soon. Yeah.
So for TR-369, we probably should have done something like that earlier. The other thing about TR-369 is the open source world wasn't what it was today back then, right? So there wasn't like this concerted effort among the industry to make an open source version of TR-369. There are many companies that did so, right?
Yeah, we know them.
And for good or ill, right? So, those things have been tested over time and kind of worked it out. But it was a different process. Fast forward to today with USP, we've taken some very different steps. So, like having an open source solution managed by the Broadband Forum out of the gate, having a certification program with self-certification through CD Router, right out of the gate, has kind of been the different way that we've taken things this time.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So you kind of touched on that, but Broadband Forum identified the need to move to move from standard broadband services to the IoT and connected services and smart home, and this is how you came up with USB with the new the new and how do you call it even advanced, modern, more comprehensive standard, which is called USP, is the services platform, or TR-369. What's actually the standard, or like one way to call it?
So
I always call it TR-369 USP. Yeah.
TR-69 is the CPE WAN management protocol, right?
Right.
WMP.
Yeah.
But somehow it got loose of calling it TR-69, right? And once it took off, there was no putting the genie back in the box. So we've tried to make a concerted effort.
That, no, yeah. Yeah.
So we've tried to make a concerted effort to call it USP, User Services Platform, but people rely on the standards number for a number of reasons. So we usually say both.
So you say both, but like eventually the idea is to lose the TR-369 and stick with USB.
I imagine it won't entirely go away, but
it's also harder to say TR-369. It's harder like on your tongue. It's like USB is much better. What did you notice that change can occur? And what challenges initially you thought you were going to solve with USB, and maybe how that changed in the process of working on that standard? And and then I'm going to ask you the next question. Right, enough. Yeah.
Well, so for people watching, Liel has given me a list of questions. So this is there is one that we're answering later. Where you're talking about what was sort of the most rewarding thing.
Yeah, definitely.
And so that's part of the story that I'm about to tell, because the most rewarding thing was that day when we got together and decided that we were going to do this.
Wow.
Because we all met, and actually we had a Broadband Forum meeting here in my hometown in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And we had a meeting beforehand with a group of people, anyone who was interested. It was maybe like 20 people from a bunch of different companies. And we met at QA Cafe for 2 days before the Broadband Forum meeting. And we laid it out. We said, okay, let's rip open the hood, and what is it that we really need to do, right? And that's when we started outlining the use cases. We kind of addressed it from two different directions. We said, okay, what are the new use cases that need to be met? And what are the things that we've learned from TR-69 that we know we could improve on? And we kind of married those things together and came up with sort of the initial list of requirements of what we need USP to do. And that included the most powerful feature of it, which is the multi-controller architecture thing, right? So being able to have multiple parties, controlling the same stuff for different reasons and have it all be separated out. We were like, yep, we absolutely have to do that. And it turns out that it is the most powerful feature of USB, right? In addition to being faster and and more efficient, and lighter and always on and that kind of a thing. It pales in comparison to our decision to be like, the single ACS to CPE relationship is now, we're breaking it open. And what's interesting is once we made that requirement, the other requirements started to fall out of it, right? So the need for end-to-end security, the need for access control, the need for role-based access control, the need to be able to onboard and offboard new controllers, the needs for agents and controllers to be able to discover each other. All that stuff fell out of the decision to try to do that multi-controller thing.
How soon do you think the new standard will be adopted? You saw companies and telcos adopt TR-69, right? It basically unfolded in front of your eyes, and now things are happening much faster, and the needs are also more challenging. And so, what is your bet?
So there's a couple. I'll describe it more in what I've observed happening, right? So TR-69 didn't explode until about 2 years after the original spec was out, right? And we're about to get to that point with USP. So in terms of like being on track of where we were, it's about the same. The thing that's very telling to me, is that we decided to take a different route in terms of open source and the certification. That in itself is already accelerating things. Part of it is just because people wouldn't have even considered it unless they had an open source solution to try to implement. That's just the world that we live in right now. But also it's that we're kind of trying to be on top of it, right? Um, that leads me to believe that it's going to be much faster than TR-369 adoption. Also because the pain points of IoT and Wi-Fi management are very acute right now. So you're going to see people trying to solve that as soon as possible. And you've seen people solve it with proprietary solutions, right? And that's not going to be sustainable in the long run. So like when people finally, we always call it like the 12-step program of new technologies, right? Like eventually everybody's like, okay, I guess we have to move to the standard.
Definitely. It's interesting, what you're saying, that people kind of hold on to the proprietary solutions until they realize that when the scaling up needs to happen, then it kind of doesn't make sense anymore.
Right, exactly. So you'll see that happen. I think you'll see it happen much faster than we've seen it with TR-369. The other telling thing to me is the number of people that are starting to join the Broadband Forum and participate in USP, and not just in terms of in number, but in terms of breadth of where they come from, right? So you have all sorts of application vendors, right? That want. So actually, this will answer another one of your questions before. You were saying sort of how has it evolved? How has USP evolved since we originally launched it? One of the things that has really caught on is the idea of, everybody sort of thought that the home gateway would sort of go away, right? Or become just a black box, right? But it turns out that it needs to be a little bit more powerful and be able to allow people to implement applications on it, right? Kind of a smart gateway, right?
Yeah.
And USP specifically enables that use case very well. And so you have application vendors coming in from security, from Wi-Fi management, from customer self-care, from telehealth. They're all coming in and being like, we want to do that because we want our applications to work on the gateway for the service provider and with the rest of the stuff in the home network with all the IT. Which is neat. Like I never in a million years imagined that was going to happen. And then all of a sudden it just sort of exploded. So
just out of curiosity, any vendors from like IoT, from the industry IoT coming also and thinking about that? Or
I do know that there have been some conversations that came up recently. I don't remember who it was, but that is something that people have reached out to us about.
It is funny because then this whole USB thing is kind of probably going to support not just the home users, but also all verticals of IoT.
Yep. And this is not to sort of discount the cloud native world, right? USP does a very specific job when it comes to interacting with end devices, and crossing difficult network barriers, right? So the world of NATs and firewalls and that sort of thing. It's built on a higher layer above that. It's not, and those are areas that cloud native solutions can't necessarily go in because, when you have the SDN world and you have orchestration and people are trying to, you have the dream from the network engineer side is that they push a button and everything reconfigures itself, right? And it's all restful and cloud native, right?
Yeah.
We've built an API on top of the USB controller that is restful to interact with that world and try to help them along too. So, eventually when it needs to plug into that larger picture, then it'll be able to do that.
Wow. That's amazing. Actually, I was just reading a survey done by Ernst & Young, EY. They surveyed like a lot of telcos around the world, I think also in Europe and also in America, and they asked them a lot of questions. And it was published at the end of 2019, so it's pretty recent. And they asked all the telcos about how you see, which kind of services do you think are going to be pushing your revenue growth? And the majority said still, media reach services, content, stuff like that, all the videos and games and stuff that's going to push. And the smaller amount said IoT and smart home, but they didn't say that it's not going to happen. It just probably means that it's going to happen, but right now they identify this whole content and media kind of thing as very revenue rich, and I think they just didn't solve the model for working the IoT and smart home. But they see that it's happening, it's coming, and I think when it comes, it's gonna explode. So I think it's just to support the point that you were.
No, it's totally true, and that's very difficult because people are always asking, oh well, how many people are implementing it? How many people are implementing it? It's like that's not how things happen. Like there's a chicken and egg situation, and once that inflection point is met, things explode very quickly. So it's hard to sort of be like, judge it by
Not a
that.
book. Yeah. Do you want to talk about QA Cafe and certification and testing for USP benefits and added value?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. So the different direction that we've taken the certification with USP is to make it self-certification. And that means that somebody can use our CD router platform to do the testing on their own and then export the results in a secure manner and submit them to a lab, and the lab just double checks them. And that we did that because we felt that the scalability of the number of companies and devices implementing USP was going to be a different problem to solve. So we wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to see certification. And so the certification goes through multiple phases, right? So we have, sort of validating the protocol and validating pieces of functionality. You can specify what functionality you support, and that ends up getting listed as part of the certification. And that's important because one of the conversations we always have, if Tim Spetz is watching, he'll know that I'm calling him out, was to try to be very forgiving. Right? Was to try to be very forgiving of devices that might be very rudimentary and just not have certain things in the data model to be able to exercise them, right? And so we have sort of a baseline level that you have to pass, and then anything that you support, you list what you support, and then you have to run those tests. But then that support gets listed in the certification, so somebody can go to the list. And actually, if you end up getting the certification logo, your certification number is in the logo. So somebody can go to the list, look it up, see what you support, and be like, oh, okay.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. That's really, really amazing. Yeah. So Broadband Forum, actually another question that we didn't actually put on the list, but let's talk about OBUSP, just because we're already touching the subject, and and then I'll ask you another one.
Yeah. So it's really neat because now it's coming up in other areas that I work in, that you have this trifecta of, you have standards, you have open source, and you have testing, right? And those three things work together to make technology work. Like that is what you need in order to have a successful technology. And so we knew that this time going into USP. And so the Broadband Forum had already created a system with some different IPR situations, specifically for creating open source projects under the umbrella of the Broadband Forum. And so we immediately tried to put together an open source USB agent. Now it is a reference implementation, so there's only so much that's within the scope of the implementation, beyond which anybody implementing it basically has to do their own thing, but they would have to do that anyway, right? So so it's very good. It's a reference implementation. You can use it to sort of implement the basic USP stack, and then use the hooks to plug into how it is that your device works in the data model and all this.
Yeah, cool. Friendly is actually planning on launching its USB client as well. It's in the works right now, going to be launched really, really soon. And now I have like a philosophical question to you. How do you see a connected world in a decade from now? Like, how do you perceive it? I'm asking because somebody asked this question, I think, do you know Waze? That kind of it's not a startup anymore. It's a company, Israeli company that was acquired by Google. And they asked the founder of Waze, how do you see the world in 5 to 10 years? He said, so nobody's going to own cars anymore. There are going to be automated vehicles coming and delivering whatever you want. Nobody's going to own refrigerators anymore, because in 5 minutes from now, you can get your food delivered basically to your doorstep. Nobody's going to own clothing anymore or washing machines, because, it's going to be all streamlined by external vendors and providers. So connected world, how do you see that in 5 to 10 years?
5 to 10 years is an interesting target. So one of the things that I like about the Broadband Forum as a standards organization is it's very much where where reality meets, where theory meets reality. And so I tend to have a little bit more of a conservative outlook when it comes to certain things. There has to be cultural changes before certain things will be accepted, right?
Agreed.
And we used to joke that my son, he's going to be 16 in only 3 years, and
wow.
But 5 years ago, we were like, oh, by the time you need to learn how to drive, you won't even have to. But I don't think that that's true anymore. Right? These are really difficult problems to solve. And, a lot of it comes down to the quality of networking, the quality of artificial intelligence, the speed at which those things can be processed. The one thing I always say is that we tend to not adopt new technologies until it becomes very much cheaper to do it with technology than to just have a human brain do it, because the human brain is so powerful, right? So driving is like one of those best examples where it's like driving is really complicated, and that's why it's such a tough problem to solve. So right now it's still kind of okay for humans to do it. But some of its infrastructure changes too, right? So you're going to see probably some change will come through government efforts, right? Where they're saying, okay, no, we're definitely going to do this. Like with the smart car thing, for example, half of the problems that they have to deal with is the fact that roads are in inconsistent infrastructure, right? So they're trying to build a computer to understand something that we built for people, and rather than building roads that are built for computers, right? Long story short, what I would say is that the media likes to sort of wax fantastical about sweeping changes that sort of happen overnight, but I think things tend to be a little bit more incremental and gradual. And so for 5 to 10 years, you will see some things that have changed incrementally, a little bit closer to where we're going, but I don't think it'll be sort of an overnight thing. And then you have the other situation where you do have that culture and policy. We have situations where it would be awesome if even renting time at a washing machine is part of the gig economy, right? But you have governments pushing back on people like Uber, saying no, you have to treat these people as employees, and that kind of puts a damper on the entire thing, because we're trying to move. The best example I ever had somebody explain to me what cloud means is that you are only ever paying for what you are using for the duration that you're using it, and then the resource gets released to be used for something else, right? That's by definition what it is. And so you can apply that concept to all sorts of things. But that's what the gig economy is, right?
Shared resources.
You're not owning a car, you're just using a car when you need a car, and then it goes back into the carpool, right? But it is cultural changes that need to be able to accept that, and until that happens, you'll see. And sometimes there's early adopters. There's actually in the class that I took for managing emerging technologies, that's how they described it. It's like you have to identify the early adopters, you identify the people who will resist it until the end of time, and then you have sort of a bell curve in the middle.
The normal distribution. I'm just trying to figure out in the context of telecoms, how more advanced can we? I mean, because these days I can pretty much do everything with my phone, right? Watching videos, it's no longer a challenge. Even connecting definitely, but having more complicated kind of tasks. Everything is in this small device, and everything is fast, and everything is like really on demand.
Right.
How much more advanced can it get?
Right. What was it? I remember I got yelled at years ago when I was on a panel for a tier 2 and tier 3 telcos in the United States, and they were asking, this was years ago. This was probably about goodness, like 2007, I'd say 2006, and they asked, how much bandwidth is really necessary, right? And I'm like, well, if you're asking me, my use case only requires, at the time I said 3 megabits per second, right? They're like, oh, you see, we don't need gigabit. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm saying. It's driven by use cases. It's driven by use cases. It always will be driven by use cases.
Yeah. And
people, sometimes it's difficult to tell people something new and try to do something in a new way. But it's mostly when people feel the pain points that things start to change. And not for nothing, like I said at the very beginning of our talk, the older technologies still stick around for a very long time, right? We still have newspapers. We still have newspapers.
it's true. Yeah. Going back to what you said, that you have to keep up with new technology, but you also have to keep track of the older ones because you need to support them
Yeah.
at some point. Any technologies do you think will become completely obsolete 10 years from now? Like fax, obviously, is obsolete, right? We can say
I plead the Fifth Amendment.
That's a good one. Yeah. Let's not insult anyone, right?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up the newspaper. I bring up the newspaper thing, but they're having a really rough time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when people have a rough time, you see consolidation, and when you see consolidation, you see you start to see sort of a degrade in quality.
Yeah.
So,
true.
But, people will still want to read stuff in the morning.
Do you read newspapers?
If I'm on a plane, so not in a while.
Yeah. Planes, right? COVID-19. And do you read online? Do you subscribe to online news outlets? Like, do you pay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Especially our local ones, right? They're kind of the most.
Yeah, because they're all trying to switch to that model where they could still deliver news to you online and still have to pay something for it.
And again, some of it is just basic human behavior stuff. It's like it's very comfortable. There's other value to physically reading something than reading something on a screen.
I agree.
Beyond the ability to get it and it being cheap to produce, right? And people have a very real experience with that and they like it. And so as long as that sticks around, they'll still be.
It's interesting, yeah. I mean, in the weekends, I really, I have Kindle and I read it a lot, but I also consume a lot of information from the screen, from tablets, from smartphone, but there's nothing like sitting on a couch on the weekend after kids are asleep and opening the actual book and reading.
Very peaceful.
It's just a different feeling. Yeah. Okay. Now kind of tricky question. Are you ready? Broadband Forum has a lot of members. Some of them compete with each other outside of the forum. You kind of touched on that also. So how do you perceive your role as the head of like a few groups there in mitigating potential frictions or potential, let's say frictions. Let's stick with that.
I've had to deal with those things in the past, and standards are very interesting because you do have competing groups coming together to decide how things.
But not just vendors, also telcos, right? There are a lot of telcos. Yeah.
And it's not as bad on the telco side, obviously, because the telcos generally aren't competing against each other for the most part. But so in standards, you basically just have to be cognizant and rely on the process, right? So we try to reach consensus, which means, anyone can object and try to hold stuff back. But if you're really starting to do it just to get your proprietary solution into the spec or something like that, it becomes obvious, and so there's a very social aspect to it, especially after the meetings too. That's where we get most of our work done. There's been some tough times, but it's a really great environment because I think everybody comes into it knowing the reason why they're coming into it, right? There's very few people, in my experience anyway, I'm sure other people have run into different things in different groups, but there's very few times where people will come in and try to railroad something through, and not understand that they're probably not going to get their way, And that's the other advice I would give to people is that, if you have an idea, especially for the Broadband User Services Group, we're very friendly and we want people to bring their ideas, especially when it comes to data model stuff. It's like, don't implement your vendor extensions, bring them into the data model. We will help you, I promise.
It's true. Yeah, but also my experience with Broadband Forum, that the vibe is amazing. I'm part of a Connected Home Council, and I've been in a couple of meetings, and people are amazing. It really feels like a tribe.
It is. It very much. And so I got the Distinguished Fellow Award this year, back in March, right before we got all shut down, right? And one of the things that I was saying is like, standards is like having a whole other family. It really is, Yeah,
I think I heard that one. Yeah. And definitely all the people I'm in touch with from Broadband Forum, like Rhonda and April, and you obviously are always going extra mile just to be more accommodating and to make everyone feel very much comfortable and give a good feeling, which is really, really, really awesome. Yeah.
I say it's the most fun you'll ever have in standards.
It's true, actually, and the meetings are fun, and there's a lot of humor, and there's a lot of fun interactions going on. Yeah. Hopefully, COVID-19 will enable people to travel soon, and then people can meet face to face. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can only tolerate this situation for so long. Although it's nice because you're in Israel and I'm not, so we can still have this conversation.
Yeah, I am in Israel, and Jason is in the States. What is the most rewarding experience in your work at Broadband Forum? You touched on that already, but you can definitely elaborate.
No, I really would say that it was that energy when we realized that it needed to be done, and it was there wasn't anyone who asked why. There wasn't anyone who was like, no, we're not ready for this. It was sort of this joint realization at the same time that it was like, yep, it's time to do this. It's time. And back then we were talking about TR-369 2.0, right? Before we decided what to call it and what direction to take things in, right? The original group was, if we were to imagine a TR-369 2.0, what would it be like? And so, we had some study documents and that kind of thing. But it was really that meeting where we sat down and the energy in the room was so cool, and to watch it come to fruition, now is just really cool. It's strange to be involved in such a thing and see, it's like your child, Yeah,
it definitely is. It definitely is. I think it's going to be. It seems like it's going to be huge. Yeah. So I think it will get even more exciting as months pass by. Which is really cool. Actually, another question that I didn't send it to you before, but now that you're talking about all the things that you're doing and things that you're involved with and all the immense amount of knowledge and information that you're processing during the day, how does your work week look? Like, how do you find time for all those amazing things? Because Broadband Forum obviously is very consuming. Technical marketing is also very consuming. There's a lot of thinking that needs to be done, but there's also a lot of tasks that needs to be accomplished. How do you manage all of it?
I have
obviously family, right, and kids. Yeah.
I have really great people around me. I have a really great boss who helps organize and manage those things. It's trying to make sure that you're never not leveraging one thing for the other thing, right? So, whenever we're doing something with the Broadband Forum, we try to make sure that we're leveraging it on our side to make sure that we get the most benefit out of what we're doing with it, right? Mm-hmm. And that helps because, then we have content and we have things that we can talk about. But no, I mean, it's not easy. I think, trying to do the marketing of two entirely different product lines is a little overwhelming sometimes, but like I said, I have good people around me and they help me.
Yeah. So it's all about team.
There's 3 product lines, right?
Yeah, and a lot of time management skills, I guess, also.
Yes. You would think.
You would think. Okay, cool. I think all my questions are answered. That was really awesome. Wow. I think it's such a cool talk that we had. Amazing, right? Yeah. Wow, we should really do more of them.